Good morning, good morning. Thank you all for coming. We're so excited that you're here. So my name is Liza Sherman. I run the Opportunity Youth Program here at Delgado, along with Bruce Payton, who I think is checking people in, and Miss Kathy Beaver, who's checking people in too. We have been working with Dr. McGuire for probably about 2 months now. We first called her in when, through my program that I run in Allied Health and Nursing, we started just to get feedback from students. I'm studying so much, I'm putting so much time in, and I'm just not remembering things. I'm not doing well on my tests, but I'm putting the time in of what's going wrong. And around that time, we happened to get wind of everything that Dr. McGuire has been doing at LSU and that she did previously at Cornell. So we made contact with her. She came and spoke at convocation for all of the professors. We have a lot of professors here who were blown away by her presentation. We've contracted with her since to come. She's doing consulting with Charity School of Nursing, helping with some issues over there. And the things that she has to impart today are simple, but they can change everything for you. You'll see Dr. McGuire has on yellow. I have on my yellow shoes. Yellow is the color of hope. And we're coming into midterms March 7th, so I would encourage you, I know some people came for the free lunch, which is going to be good, but you are going to come away with so much more, so pay close attention. I'm going to read a quick introduction of Dr. McGuire really quickly, just so you know some of her background. Dr. Saundra McGuire is the past director of the Center for Academic Success and retired professor of chemistry at LSU. Prior to joining LSU in 1999, Dr. McGuire spent 11 years at Cornell University, where she received the coveted Clark Distinguished Teaching Award. Her best-selling book, Teach Yourself How to Learn, Strategies You Can Use to Ace Any Course at Any Level, was published in 2018. Her husband, Dr. Stephen McGuire, is a retired professor of physics. They have 2 daughters, Dr. Carla McGuire Davis and Dr. Stephanie McGuire, and they are the doting grandparents of Joshua, Ruth, Daniel, and Joseph Davis. She and her husband were named Louisiana Legends by Louisiana Public Broadcasting in 2022. She has spoken at over 500 institutions in 48 states and 15 countries on 6 continents. She wants you to know that she's thrilled to be able to talk with Delgado students today, so listen up.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Oh, that was kind of lame. Good morning. Okay, great, that's a lot better. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here to speak with Delgado students because I had such a good time with the faculty, and this is a great crowd. I was expecting like maybe 15, 20 students, so I want to thank you all for coming out. And we're going to get right into it because what I'm going to be talking about is learning strategies that will make you a lot more efficient, I think, at learning. If you're like me, then I used to just spend a lot of hours studying, but then I found I couldn't retain a lot of it. Does that ever happen to anybody here? Yeah, and so the strategies we're going to talk about, then hopefully you'll have a way to not have that happen so much. Now, I see someone taking notes, and that is absolutely fine, but you're reminding me to let everybody know that you're going to get this whole PowerPoint presentation. It's going to be available to you after the presentation, but feel free to take pictures of the screen, you can take notes, whatever you want to do, but you will get it and it'll be available, I'm going to say by this afternoon, by late this afternoon at the latest. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is metacognition. And I say that that's the key to acing courses and life. And I use it all the time in my own life, and I'll tell you in a minute how we just used it. But it's a very powerful tool. And so let me just ask, how many of you would say, oh, I gotta warn you, I ask a lot of questions. And most of the questions have no right or wrong answer. I just want to know what your experience has been and what you're thinking. So, feel free to answer anything. But let me just ask, how many of you would say that you are very familiar with that term metacognition? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, I'm seeing a few people. Oh, and I do not have some faculty in the audience. If you're faculty, raise your hand, please. Oh, okay, more than I expected. Thanks so much for coming. Okay, so a few of us are, most of us are not. So let's dissect the term. Now, I'm going to ask you, metacognition, when I do this, that's your key to just yell out what you're thinking. Okay. So metacognition, is that a simple word or a compound word, do you think? Compound, absolutely. And so if it's a compound word, it has a root word and either a prefix or a suffix. And so what do you think the root word is in metacognition? Oh, this is great. Yeah, almost every other student group I've talked to, I heard some people say meta, but everybody here said cognition. So this is a special place. I love this place. Okay, yeah, so cognition. And so if I ask you, what comes to mind when you hear the word cognition, what would you say? Okay, the brain or thinking or the mind. Yeah, this is one of those, there are a lot of different answers that are all correct. So brain, thinking, the mind, absolutely. Now for purposes of this discussion though, I'm going to use thinking as the meaning that I'm going to use. And so when you put a prefix meta onto a word, that just means doing that thing about that thing. And I'll give you an example. Meta-research. Has anybody ever heard of meta-research studies? Okay, yeah, meta-research studies is just research that's looking at other research. So for example, with the COVID-19 vaccine, there are a lot of people now who are looking at all the individual research studies that looked at what was it effective with certain groups, and then they're putting together one big paper that summarizes all the research. And so if we're talking about metacognition, and cognition is thinking, then metacognition would be thinking about your own thinking. And so the way I like to describe it is, it's almost as if you have a big brain outside your brain looking at what your brain is doing. And that big brain is asking your brain questions. And it's saying, does she understand this information, or did she just memorize it last night because the test is today? It's saying, if she has a paper to write, does she realize that she needs to get a topic early, and she needs to talk with her professor about what she's planning to write about, get some feedback. She needs to get a draft written early enough that she can get feedback on that. She can make corrections, so when she turns in the final paper, it's as good as it can be. Or is she just planning to whip it out the night before the way she did in high school? So metacognition is going to allow you to really analyze your thinking and incorporate a lot of these strategies that we're going to be talking about. And so I want you to know that I've heard about Delgado, because my husband, and you'll see him in a minute, but he grew up in New Orleans. He grew up in the Treme area. Anybody here from the Treme? Oh, okay, just one person. 3rd Ward. Anybody from 3rd Ward? Because he was born in the 3rd Ward. Okay, I'm going to tell him that nobody here knows anything about where he came from. But in any event, his sister, my sister-in-law, went to Delgado, and she graduated way back in '77, before your grandparents were born, probably. She got an associate in business administration. I met a student earlier who was majoring in business administration, and she immediately got a job in DC in procurement accounting, and she was a contract specialist. And I asked her what she liked most about Delgado, and she said that what she liked most is that the instructors were always willing to provide extra help whenever any student was having trouble. And when I talked to the faculty back in January, I saw exactly what she meant, because it was very clear to me that the faculty here are so invested in your success. They want to do whatever they can to make you successful. And the reason they brought me in to talk to you is because if you know some things that you can do to help your learning and work with them, then the sky's the limit. And so I want to start by telling you a story. This is a true story. Well, all my stories are true. I don't make up stuff. But this is something that happened at a dinner party in Germany back in the 1930s. There was a Swiss aerodynamic scientist at this party, and he got bored with what was going on, and so he started thinking about things that fly, since he's an aerodynamic scientist. And so he started thinking about bumblebees. And he started thinking, why should bumblebees be able to fly? Because they have a pretty large body compared to the wings. They don't have this long, sleek body with long wings like a wasp. And here it is from another vantage point. You can see that, they have this huge body, and it seems like teeny tiny wings. And so he started doing some calculations on his napkin, looking at the ratio of the body to the wing size, etc. And the calculations kept telling him that bumblebees should not be able to fly. And, okay, I'm going to do this. Now, and this happens a lot. As you heard, I've spoken a lot. And I always give the photography people trouble because they're trying, you got a good shot? Got it. Okay, so I was going to stop and then just let him get a shot so that I wouldn't keep frustrating him to looking like that and everybody's trying to take it. Okay, so back to the bumblebee story. So he started doing calculations, and the calculations told him that bumblebees should not be able to fly. The body's just too big, the wings are too small. And he did the calculations over and over, and he got exactly the same result. Bumblebees should not be able to fly. But the good news is bumblebees do not know any aerodynamic science. And so they don't know that they're not supposed to fly. And so they just keep right on flying. And I like to tell that story to students because it is likely that as you climb this academic ladder in your profession, you're going to meet people who will assume that you're not going to be able to be successful. So let me just ask you to think back, go all the way back to middle school. If you, raise your hand if this is true, if you ever encountered anybody, when you told them that you were going to do something, they acted like, I don't think you're going to be successful in that. That's ever happened to you, raise your hand. Okay, yeah. And if it has not, that's great, but you can expect that it probably will happen at some point. And so when that happens, what you should know is that you can just act like the bumblebee. You don't have to listen to those people. Many times they're haters. Have you noticed that? Yeah, they're just haters. They don't want you to succeed, so you don't have to pay any attention to them. But what I do want you to expect obstacles, because there are things that will come up that you had not anticipated. In fact, you can think back to your first day at Delgado, let's say. How many of you, you thought you were humming right along, you were doing well, and then something seemed to come out of the blue that was going to knock you off your game? Anybody experienced anything like that? Yeah, okay, and so, it still happens to me today, like getting the PowerPoint presentation up. But I want you to know that obstacles are stumbling blocks, but stumbling blocks and stepping stones look identical. And you get to determine what role that's going to play in your life. And you're going to hear examples of some students who thought that they had encountered a huge stumbling block, but it turned out to be a stepping stone. In fact, my stumbling block this morning, I didn't even know that PowerPoint could not exist on the local computer, that it was only cloud-based. And so now in the future, if I have this happen, I'll know what to tell my tech people about how to fix that. So, okay, and so I'm going to tell you, this Indianapolis pediatrician experienced a lot of obstacles. He is now an award-winning pediatrician, but when he was in medical school for his first semester, he said that if he had gotten 30 points higher on the first exam, he would have come up to the lowest D in the class. So he failed it miserably. And so he went and talked to the professor, and the professor told him, he said, Yancy, you can do this, you're just studying wrong. So he gave him some study strategies. He did well, he graduated. He was the youngest chief resident in the history of Riley Hospital in Indianapolis. And I've had students who failed the first test, they've come in, given them strategies, and they made A's after that. And the students, though, who made B's or C's on the first test, they never came in and talked to anybody. And so they finished the course with a B or a C, whereas the people who failed the course finished with an A. So stumbling blocks really can be stepping stones, but we have to, thank you so much for having that go off. Reminds me to let everybody know, I asked everybody, didn't ask everybody to silence their phones. And when I was about, about 22 minutes into the presentation, he would have his go off as a reminder to ask everyone to silence their phones. And so thank you so much. Everybody else, please silence your phones if you have not. He went to Creighton University, he got the Alumni Merit Award. And so basically, as we said, stumbling blocks can be turned into stepping stones. And I say metacognition is the key to that. And so we've already started talking a little bit about what metacognition is, but before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'll say, of it, I want to make some promises to you. And my promise to you is that if you take this presentation very seriously, and if you faithfully implement the techniques that we're going to discuss, then you're going to understand exactly why your past performance might not have been up to your true capability. Because I know everybody in this room has the ability to ace this place. And if you're not doing that now, that means that you're not reaching your full potential, and we'll understand why that's the case. And you'll have very concrete, effective strategies that you can start using immediately. And they will not only improve your scores on exams, but they'll also improve your understanding of the concepts, and you'll be able to ace your courses, any professional exams you might have to take, and be excellent in your career. Now, I know these strategies work. And how do I know they work? Because I wrote the book on it. And this is the book, Teach Yourself How to Learn, and it's now a bestseller. And it has like 4.6 stars, I think, on Amazon. A few haters gave it bad reviews, but of the thousands who reviewed it, and so the strategies that we're going to be talking about are discussed in the book. And they've been so effective that I actually got an award in the Oval Office of the White House. This was an award that was given to faculty who actually mentor students to be successful toward getting their PhD. And I got the award based on the impact that these strategies have had on many students. And as you heard, my husband and I were named 2022 Louisiana Legends by Louisiana Public Broadcasting this past April. And he's from New Orleans, as I said. I'm from Baton Rouge. We both went to Southern University. And this is our red carpet photo. Don't we look cute, y'all? I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so the strategies definitely work. And so we started talking about what metacognition is, and we said it's your ability to think about your own thinking, it's your ability to be consciously aware that you are a problem solver. So that when things come up, you don't necessarily have to ask someone else what the answer is. You can take steps to answer your questions, to solve your problems. And as an example of how metacognition works, I'm going to give you an example of a problem that many of us have. I can tell you I have it big time, but if you have this problem, then raise your hand. How many of us have a problem with procrastination? Okay, all right. Well, I'll tell you how metacognition can work. Okay, and I didn't used to tell this to everyone, this strategy I'm going to tell you now, but I talked to a group of LSU students twice, and the second time I went, I asked them what was the most useful thing they learned from the first visit, and a lot of them said it was this strategy that we're going to talk about now. Okay, so we talked about procrastination. I'm going to give you an example of a conversation between your brain and your metacognitive brain. So your brain says, oh, you know, I'm a procrastinator, I put things off. I guess it'd be better if I didn't procrastinate, but I'm just a procrastinator. That's what I do. I do my best work at the last minute. Then the metacognitive brain says, no, wait a minute. No, metacognition gets us in big trouble. And then the brain says, well, like what? What are you talking about? And so the metacognitive brain says, well, you know what kinds of trouble it gets us in. So I'm going to ask you, what are some of the negative consequences of procrastination?
Rushed work.
What'd you say?
Rushed work.
Rushed work, exactly. And if you rush the work, you're not going to be able to do your best work, and so you're not going to get the grade that you're capable of getting, which means that you're not going to graduate from this place with a GPA that you could have. And what are the negative consequences? If you graduate from here with a GPA that's less than your ability, how is that going to impact you, think? Say it loud. Exactly. You won't get accepted into the right if you're planning to go to a four-year college, if you're planning to go to nursing school, if you're planning to have a career where they're looking at what the GPA is before they even bring people in the interview. Yeah, big problem. So rushed work. What's another negative consequence of procrastination? Okay, you got to yell it out because okay. Yeah, unnecessary stress. Now, I was waiting for somebody to say that because that's the biggest one for me, stress. The longer I put stuff off, the more stressed I am. The more stressed I am, the longer I put it off. So stress is a big one. I'll take one more. Anybody think of one more that we, yes?
The more you're okay with mediocrity.
Yes, nobody's ever said that before. He said you get to be okay with mediocrity. Because if you put stuff off, then all you can turn in is mediocre work. And then pretty soon, you're used to doing mediocre work. Absolutely. I'm going to use that. I'm going to tell people about that. Yeah. And so, okay, so then the metacognitive brain convinces the brain that, okay, I get it. That's a problem. Procrastination is a problem. The metacognitive brain says, yeah, we got to solve that problem. And the brain says, well, yeah, but I don't know how to solve procrastination. And the metacognitive brain said, yeah, I understand that. There's a lot of stuff you don't know anything about that you figured out you figured it out. And so I'm going to ask you, let's say if you heard a new slang term that you didn't know what it meant and you wanted to know what it meant, what would you do? Okay, look it up using what usually? Okay, Urban Dictionary or the internet or Google, yeah. And so the metacognitive brain says, well, you Google everything else. You use Urban Dictionary for everything else. You use the internet for everything else. So use it for procrastination. And so I actually Googled how to avoid procrastination one day because you saw me raise my hand. I'm a procrastinator. I was procrastinating writing a paper. How many of you procrastinate if you have to write a paper? Yeah, for me, that's the worst. And so I kept putting the thing off, and my metacognitive brain told me, you teach this stuff, so just use it. And so I Googled how to avoid procrastination, and it took me to a lot of great sites, but one, and I still use this strategy today, it said it's easy to solve procrastination. Just use the thing that everybody carries around with them now. Everybody has a smartphone, so use this to tackle procrastination, because you can use this to tackle the hardest part about doing something that you really don't feel like doing. And what is the hardest part of doing something you really don't feel like doing? Exactly, getting it started. And so what this thing says is just take out your cell phone and set the timer. Set the timer for however long you want to work on this thing. It could be 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I set it for 45 minutes. And then commit to yourself that when you hit start, you're going to start this thing. And you are not going to stop until the timer goes off. And so I said, okay, so I set it for 45 minutes. All I wanted to do was get the outline and the introduction written. But when 45 minutes was up, I had written the outline, the introduction, and the whole first section. Because do you notice that things tend to go a little bit faster once you get into it? Yeah. And so the next time you find yourself procrastinating, your metacognitive brain will probably tell you, remember what that lady said about this? And so just take out your cell phone and tackle it. And so it's also your ability to plan, monitor, and control your mental processing so you know if you're understanding something or just memorizing it. It is your ability to accurately judge your level of learning. And that's huge because how many people here have ever heard a professor at Delgado say something like, you know, you're in college now, you have to kick it up a notch. This is not high school. Raise your hand if you heard anything kind of like that. Yeah, because we professors love to say stuff like that. So now let me ask, who thinks you can tell me exactly what those professors are talking about when they make that statement? So I think I'm now going to ask you to raise your hand to, so we're not all talking at once. Yeah, what are they talking about when they say you got to kick it up a notch? Yes?
The way you study.
Okay.
Not memorizing, but like really understanding it.
Excellent. Yeah, they mean that when you study, you can't just memorize, you really got to understand. Anybody have another idea? Because this is one, no right or wrong answers. I just want to know what you're thinking. Yes?
You're responsible for your own work. Nobody's going to be checking on you.
Exactly. You have more responsibility for your own learning, whereas before in high school, who made sure you got everything done? Your parents and teachers and everything, but now you have to have more responsibility. Great answers. Anybody thought of another thing that's different here? Oh, yes.
Unlike with high school, college is something for you to learn how to, you know, like get the job that you want to do. So it's really important that you get the work that you need to get done.
Yeah, that's really, really crucial. What she said was that unlike high school, the things that you're doing in college are really preparing you for, I'm paraphrasing this, so if I'm not saying it right, just shake your head back, no. Or give me a yes if I'm paraphrasing it right. But what I got from that is she said, you're preparing yourself for your career. And so now you have to understand this because it's not just for the classes, it's what you're going to be using when you're in your career. And I love that answer because, you know, this thing about, you know, the chat thing that came out recently that they're afraid that everybody's going to use it to get the thing to write papers and stuff. And so whenever I talk about that, I said, yeah, you know, it's always been possible to cheat. But what I like to help students understand is you don't need to cheat. Because I think a lot of students cheat because they don't think that they can get as high a grade not cheating as they could get if they cheated. But with these strategies, you don't have to cheat. And just think about it. Someone who's cheated their way through courses versus someone who, as she said, really understood all the concepts in their courses, when both of them get out into the work world, who's going to fall on their face? The cheater, exactly. So it might get you the job because you have grades, but it's not going to keep your job. So absolutely. Now, what that has to do with, I'm going to go back to the first one, and she said it's you got to understand things as opposed to just memorize. And that has something to do with something that's called Bloom's taxonomy, B-L-O-O-M-S taxonomy. So raise your hand if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Ah, okay, a few of us are, not very many. So we're going to talk about exactly what that is, because we will see that in addition to memorizing and understanding, there are a bunch of other levels that are there for us to be able to access. And it's your ability to know what you know, what you don't know. So you don't show up at a test or a quiz thinking, okay, I know this stuff, I'm good, and then you get to the test, look at the first two questions, it's like, uh-oh, I guess I don't know that. Okay, and so I'm going to give you some at least 3 very specific strategies that you can use in pretty much any course. And I'm going to show you how they've been effective with other students. And the first student I want to introduce you to is Dana. And I met Dana. She had gone to LSU. She wasn't a medical physicist. But as you see, she made 80 and 54 on the first 2 tests. And so she had decided that she was not going to be able to succeed in physics. And so I met her at a Change Your Major workshop. I wasn't teaching the workshop. I just went to see what did they tell students at a change your major workshop. And the counselor asked everybody to stand up and say who they were, what their major was going to be, what they're changing to. And Dana stood up. She said, well, my name is Dana, and I was trying to major in physics, but that's just not working out. And the advisor said, oh, yeah, I understand, because physics is hard. And so at the end of the workshop, I left first, and so when Dana came out, I said, Dana, do you have a few minutes to spend with me in the office? I can share some strategies with you. And she said, sure. And I said, look, I'm not going to try to talk you out of leaving physics, because if you really want to do something else, that's absolutely fine with me. But I want you to know you're leaving not because you can't do it, but because you decided to leave. And so she decided to stay. Now, yeah, and you're going to hear in her own voice what her problem was. Now, yeah, I think that I can get this to, yes, okay. And so you're going to hear Dana in her own voice say what she did. Now, I think, oh, okay, that's the timer. I need to put maybe I don't have to put the volume all the way up. Let's see if you can hear her.
Hi, my name is Dana Lewis Derby, and I am a former student of Dr. McGuire's, and she asked for me to share a little bit of my story with you today. So I met Dr. McGee at a Find Your Major workshop at LSU when I was a freshman. I knew that I wanted to major in physics when I started college, but I quickly found myself failing my introduction to physics class. So I freaked out and thought, you know what, maybe I'm not cut out for this, and decided to attend that workshop. When I went there, I shared my story, and afterwards Dr. McGuire approached me and asked me if I would consider sticking with physics a little while longer and maybe trying to approach my assignments and my tests in a little bit of a different way. So instead of changing my major, I did. I stayed with physics. Her and I began working together, and she began teaching me some of her strategies revolving around metacognition. I quickly learned that my method of trying to memorize material in order to pass assignments and tests just was not going to cut it. I had to really learn the ability to problem solve, and I essentially had to relearn how to study. I was reading chapters differently, making notes, and essentially completing homework assignments like I had to teach the material to someone else, with the thought behind that being if you can teach it, then you really do know what you're talking about. After working with Dr. McGuire for a full semester, I ended up making an A in my physics course, and I went on to graduate with my bachelor's in physics from LSU with honors, all with Dr. McGuire's help. So I didn't quite know that going to one workshop was going to be so instrumental in setting me up for success throughout my entire college career. My life would be very, very different if I had not met Dr. McGuire that day and implemented the strategies that she taught me. She is absolutely phenomenal, and she really does have the golden ticket of information that's going to push you towards optimal success. So I hope that you enjoy the workshop today. Thanks for listening, and best of luck. Bye.
Okay, and I asked Dana to make that for students so that you could hear it, but she said two things in there that are really not true. She said that I'm phenomenal, and it's not me that's phenomenal, it's the strategies that are phenomenal. And when you use them, you'll get the same kind of result. And she said that we worked together for a whole semester, and she did better. And we did work together for a whole semester because I became her mentor, but in only one session where she got the information that we're talking about today, was she able to change and do what she needed to do. Now, let me go back and tell you that her problem before, remember the young lady talked about memorizing? It's not just about memorizing, it's about understanding. And so Dana was trying to memorize formulas, and she was actually using Cramster.com. Now, you probably never heard of Cramster.com because it's Che.com now. But yeah, I heard somebody chuckle, so that tells me, I know nobody here is using it, but your friends are probably using it, so I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But then she started solving problems with no external aids, and she did well. And so she's now a practicing medical physicist. And so I'm going to tell you now a strategy, a really, really important strategy for using your homework as a learning tool as opposed to the way I used homework, was just to do it and turn it in for a grade. And so let me ask, I want you to think back to the last time you were doing homework. And if you have ever done this, so you have to think of all the times you've done homework. If you've ever done this, raise your hand. And if I could raise both hands, they would be raised. But if you have ever done this, you read a problem that you had to solve or a question that you had to answer, and then flip back in the chapter to find an example of the problem you had to solve or a discussion of the question you had to answer. If you ever done that, raise your hand. Okay, yeah, most of us are doing that. I did that. Now, let me ask this. When we did that, was our brain solving the problem or answering the question? Give me a yes or no. No, absolutely not. What was solving the problem or answering the question? Exactly, the book, the textbook author, the example, right. But you are really, really bright students in here. I was a bright student. And so when I read that, I remember thinking, oh yeah, I understand that. Remember thinking that? Yeah, oh yeah, I got that, I understand that. But when we got to the test or quiz, if they changed anything at all around, what happened? Uh-oh, I don't got that, what the student said. Yeah, and so this homework process is a way to avoid that. And so the first thing is, before you look at the first problem or question, you got to study the information. You know, look at your notes or the textbook to prepare. And that's not what I did. What I would do, I would sit down and do my homework, and I would go straight to the problem. I'd go straight to the question. But instead of doing that, study that information so that when you get to the question of the problem, you'll have some information in your head that will allow you to start working the problem or start answering the question. And when you are studying that, you are going to come across example problems or maybe these little thought questions that say, you know, why do you think this is the case? So they'll give you an example. And let me ask, right now, if you're using either your textbook or your notes, what do you do when you get to an example? And you can be totally honest with me. I will not hear anything from you. I have not heard from students at any of the other institutions I spoke to, so be brutally honest. What do you do when you get to an example? Skip it, yes. That's what all the students say. And that surprised me because I never skipped it. Some of you probably did what I do. I would read the problem statement. I would see what the author did. But I don't want you to do that either. So I want you to recognize that the examples of those little thought questions, those are our brain's best resources for convincing itself that it can work these problems. If it studied the information, it can work these problems. It can answer the questions. And so just read the problem statement and then start working it yourself. And even if you're not sure exactly how to continue, let's say you get to the second step, you don't know what to do, then I want you to just power your way through until you get to an answer. Pretend it's a multiple choice question. You have to have an answer. And then when you get to the answer, just compare the answer you got with the answer that's in the book. Now, if you got the same answer, you can look at what the book did. But if you didn't get the same answer, I don't want you to look yet. I want you to try to figure out where your mistake was. And I've got to ask you, at this point in the process, do you think making a mistake is good or bad? Good. Okay, so my record is intact. When I talk to faculty, I always ask them, what do you think students say? Faculty always tell me students say bad. As the faculty at Delgado, I think, did you guys say bad too? I think so, but Delgado was they were different than most faculty groups I talked to, so they might have said good enough, but almost all faculty groups say bad, but students always say good, and you're absolutely right. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's bad if you don't make a mistake at this point. It's fantastic if you don't make a mistake at this point, but why might it be good if you make a mistake at this point? Raise your hand if you, okay, yes. Exactly, you can learn from your mistakes, absolutely. And actually, there are 3 common answers I get. So again, no right or wrong answers. What's another reason that making a mistake at this point might be good? Okay, 2 and then 3. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
It's not on the test.
Exactly, it's not on the test. And I want you to think that, I'm using that because I want you to think back to when you get your test returned. How many of us have ever gotten a test returned and then you look at it and you say, I would have done so much better, and I made just so many simple mistakes. Have you ever had that experience? Oh, I made so many careless mistakes. Well, I used to think the same thing, but my attitude now is there's really no such thing as just careless mistakes. Mistakes only look careless and simple once we know what the right thing is. Once you know what the right thing is, your mistake looks so simple. But mistakes are things that have to be made. And Either you're gonna make them during this process, or where are you gonna make them? On the test, exactly. So we've got to do this. So we got to, and where's my number 3? Oh, yes.
I was just gonna say, so you don't make the same mistake again.
Exactly. And actually, those are the top 3 that I get. And not that there are not others. So if anybody else had another reason, raise your hand. But you won't make the same mistake twice. And because then you will know exactly what mistake might be in the future, and so you can avoid that. Absolutely. And so if you do that and try to correct your mistakes, okay, let's let this catch up. And then you can figure out where that mistake was, and you can do it. And that's just the examples. When you actually get to the actual homework problem or question, treat it as if it's a test or a quiz. Try to do 2 or 3 of them and speed it up. Because has anybody here ever run out of time on a test or a quiz? Yeah, and see, the main reason that a lot of people run out of time is not that they don't know the information, but they've never practiced doing things really quickly. Because you have as much time as you want on homework, and so they're used to, kind of slowly plodding through everything to make sure it's correct, and then you run out of time on a test. But if you speed it up, practice doing that, then when you get to the test or the quiz, you'll be able to do that. So I really recommend, and the way it works with questions is, if it's a homework question, then try to study the stuff first, and then when you look at the question, try to write down everything you know to answer the question, and then go back and compare what you've written to the discussion in the book and see, did they have something you didn't have? Did you have something they didn't have? And so once you give your brain the workout to do that when you get to the test or quiz, then it's going to be very good at it. Now, how do we make this strategy work best? We got to start the problems early. Because when do most people start their homework? The night before the test, yeah. And if you started the night before the test, what is your main goal at that point? Exactly, just to get it done. I call that being in get-her-done mode. Just get her done, get her done. And so you will not be able to make yourself use that strategy we just talked about if you started the day before, the night before. So as soon as the problems are given or questions are given, then try to do maybe like 2 or 3 a day, something like that, so you have enough time to implement this process that we talked about. And don't flip back to see example problems, work on yourself. Don't give up too soon. Because, and I love the answer I'm going to go back to, in college we're really preparing for our career. And so in your career, you're going to have situations where you won't immediately know the answer. And it's going to happen in courses too. And if you give up too soon, you can't train your brain to know that it can figure out how to solve these things, but sometimes it may take a little while. And so don't give up too soon, but then don't spend too much time on it either, much more than 30 minutes before you try to go back and look to see. But that strategy works very well. Now, there's the resource that I mentioned earlier, CHAG. And so I'm not asking about you, I'm asking for a friend. How many of you have friends who use CHAG? Oh, okay, not too many of you. Well, tell your friends that CHAG is not your friend. Because with CHAG, as you see, it says, learn how to solve it step by step. So they give all these step-by-step solutions, and people just use that, and they're not figuring out how to work the problems or answer the questions on their own. So I highly recommend that we don't use CHAG. Okay, now the next student that I want to share with you is a student who was having trouble in psychology. He made a 47 and a 52 on the first 2 tests, and I talked to him 30 minutes before the 3rd test. And I thought he'd make it in the low to mid 70s. I figured, 20-point bump just 30 minutes the night before. But as you see, he made an 82. And I was shocked. He was shocked. He called me. He was so excited. And he said, Dr. McGuire, I made an 82 on that test. I said, wow, Travis, that's fantastic. If you make higher than Ann, and I was trying to think of a stretch score to make him really stretch for that I really didn't think he would make. He said, if you make higher than an 85 on your next test, I will take you to lunch. And he called back about 3 weeks later, Dr. McGuire, I made an 86 on that test. I took him to lunch. I said, Travis, what are you doing? He said, I'm just doing that stuff you told me to do. And what I told him to do was a reading strategy. How many of us have reading to do in our classes? Got reading assignments, right? And if you ever had the experience where you start to read, you get a little ways in, then your mind starts to wander. Okay, yeah. And so that's what was happening to Travis, because he said, he was reading the stuff, it just wasn't retaining it. And so I actually went to a 4-week summer workshop to learn this strategy. because there were so many students at LSU who were coming to our center asking us if we could teach them more effective reading strategies. But, you know, I was a chemistry professor. I didn't know how to teach people how to read. So I went to this workshop, learned just really, really useful stuff that I'm going to share with you. What I learned there was they said that the reason that most of us don't get the most out of our reading is exactly because of that. We get a little ways in, and then your mind starts to wander. And if you're like me, I don't even realize that my mind is wandering because I'm what's called a sub-vocalizer. I can hear the words in my head, and I'm thinking about something else. And so it's only about 2 or 3 paragraphs down the road that I realized I wasn't paying attention to that stuff. And so when you realize that your mind is wandering and you haven't been paying attention, what do you do at that point? Okay, go back and reread. And this is so fascinating because nobody here said close the book. And most places I go, people say close the book. And which is okay, because if your mind is very tired and your metacognitive brain will let you know there's no way you're going to get anything out of here. We got to take a break. And so hit it again in 30 minutes. But most of you said, you know, reread it, which is what I would always do. Now, the thing is, you might get a little bit farther this time. You're not going to get a lot farther because you really don't have the rest of the strategies. And so I don't have a clicker, so let me just see what the next slide. Okay, yeah, so I will do this. Okay, and so what I learned was that in order to prevent your mind from wandering, you need to give your brain a big picture, an overview of what it's about to read. And what we know from cognitive science, so the strategies I'm talking about, have really been things that have been determined over the past maybe 30, 40 years or so from cognitive science, when we can do brain imaging and see exactly what's helpful to make people learn. And so what we know is if the brain is trying to learn something new, if it has a big picture, an overview of what it's about to learn, and then it gets individual details to fill in that big picture, it's much more efficient than if it starts out just getting individual details trying to create its own big picture. And so the first thing to do is give your brain that big picture by reading, if it's a chapter, read the introduction, read the summary, and when you're reading it by sections, look at the bold-faced print, the italicized words, any charts or graphs. So for example, if I were in a chemistry course and there was a chapter on acids and bases, then I might see strong acid, strong base, weak base in bold-faced print. And I might, so that tells my brain that that's what it's going to be reading about. Now the next step is to come up with questions that you want the reading to answer for you. So in the example I just gave, I might say, well, I wonder what this thing is going to say is the difference between strong acids and weak acids. Does one of them burn you more than another? I don't know. When you see what this reading has to say about it. And then when you start to read, just read the first paragraph. And stop, put that, after you've read that first paragraph, stop, put it in your own words, and then read the second paragraph, stop, put that in your own words, and try to fold in what was in the first paragraph, and then read subsequent paragraphs the same way. But whenever I give this strategy to students, I always stop at this point. I gotta ask you, does it sound like, if I gotta do all that, it's gonna take a long time to finish the reading? Does it sound like it'll take a long time?
How can you put that in something like accounting? I have trouble with that. How can I use that with that?
Okay, that's a great question. So something like accounting. Okay, so actually, do we have any accounting professors in the audience? Okay, I'm going to take a stab at it. And so I'm going to, when you see your accounting professor, say, this is what this woman said. Is that true? But what I'm thinking, and I don't know accounting, but I know that there are certain terms, there's certain processes, there's certain procedures. And so if I were reading an accounting chapter, then I would, and hopefully they will put certain things in boldface, like, you know, costs and whatever the opposite of that is in accounting. Okay, and so then what you would do is you would start thinking about, you know, cost, what can I relate that to? What does that mean in my everyday life? So that you're giving your brain something to kind of connect that term to. And then when you read something that's a paragraph, it may not even be in paragraph form, it might be like an equation or something like that. And so then just stop and think, what are the different parts of this equation? What do they mean? What would happen if I change something around? Why is this equation the way it is? So basically what we're talking about is really getting your brain engaged in the material. Does that make sense? Okay, but verify that. You can trust me, but verify. Okay, but great question, yeah. And if anybody else, if you have questions, you know, as we go along, then feel free to ask them too. And so, so we were talking about it sounds like it would take a lot longer, but students love this thing. Students will come back, when we were in person, they would come to my office and say, Dr. McGuire, I love that reading thing. And so I'd say, great, I'm so, they would say, I'm getting so much more out of my reading now. And I would say, great. I said, but now are you finding that it's taking you longer to finish the reading doing this than what you were doing before? And to a person, they said, well, no. Actually, I finished the reading sooner doing it this way than what I was doing before. So my question to you is, why should it take less time if you got to go through all this than what they were doing before? Okay, I see it. Yes?
Taking all those like 30-minute breaks, you can find that you're.
Okay. Yeah, she's saying because you're not taking all those 30-minute breaks because your mind was wandering and it decided that it couldn't go any further and had to close the book. Absolutely. And what other reason? Okay, I see a 2 and then a 3. Yes.
You don't have to read it over and over.
You don't have to read it over and over. Yes, I'll come back to that. And were you going to say, did you have something different? Yes.
The ball gets rolling in the right direction.
The ball gets in there. Nobody said, you guys are so good. You give me so many answers I've never heard before. He said you get the ball started in the right direction. Yeah, because if you don't have that overview to kind of create that roadmap, then your mind can go anywhere when you start reading. Absolutely. And I saw one other hand, I think, yes.
Tagging along with them, you're understanding it faster.
Yes, you're understanding it faster. And that's a perfect segue into what I was going to talk about with this rereading. And it does go faster because the old way, you read a little bit, but then you have to go back. Read, go back, read, go back, read, go back, read, go back. Now with the new way, you actually are moving more slowly through the material, but because you're more focused, you will get to the end point sooner. And think of it this way, you also, using this process, you get faster as you go along. Because can you imagine when you got to paragraph 6, if you've understood everything in the first 5, you're going to be able to read paragraph 6 a lot faster. And so once you get it started in the right direction, then it really starts humming along and we're focused and we can put things together. Yes?
So say you're taking an English class and you're reading a novel. Would you use like the same strategy?
Excellent question. Yes. She said, what if you're reading a novel or maybe any book that doesn't have those markers that we're talking about, doesn't have any boldface print or italicized words? What I suggested, and there was a student who came back and he said it worked great, but just to read the first and last sentences of the paragraphs. Because many times, that first sentence in the paragraph is, what do they call it, the topic sentence? Or and the main idea, exactly. And so you can do that if it's a novel or something like that. Yeah, great question. Okay, and so let me get this to catch up with where we are. Okay, summarize in your own words. And you can annotate, you can make notes in the margins, but I have to tell you this because how many of you are like me and you cannot make yourself write in a textbook? Yeah, and I thought it was just me, but I cannot, and it's not like I'm going to sell it back to the bookstore or anything, I know I'm going to keep it, but I can't defile the page by writing on the book. And so if that's the case, what works really well is just sticky notes. And so you get sticky notes and you put whatever you're going to put there. And so I'm able to do that, but I could not ever write in a book. But you can indicate if there are any paragraphs that are particularly important, that have important concepts or things you want to remember. And then the next R is review. When you get to the end of a section, stop and review that whole section. And then the very last R is reflect. Are there any other views? Are there any other ways of thinking about this? If you were in a conversation with the author, are there any questions you might have? And I'll give an example of that. I see a lot of our culinary students here. This is fantastic. I'm so glad you came. Y'all do stuff that I could not do in a million years. Now, I tell you all my stories are true. This is a true story. But I actually Googled how to boil an egg. Now, I knew how to boil an egg, but my metacognitive brain says, well, you don't know exactly how many minutes to do it. To get it to exactly the consistency you want. And so I looked it up, and it gave me the different minutes for if I wanted soft boiled or medium boiled or hard boiled. And if I went over the number of minutes, it was going to be green on the outside. Y'all know about that? Yes. And so I'm really glad that you're here. So to reflect, I thought about that because the example I want to give there is, let's suppose that you were taking a community nutrition course. And that could be people in nursing, people in health management, culinary. You're taking a community nutrition course, and the book says, tell all of your clients to eat a diet that is very rich in fresh fruits and vegetables, because we know fresh fruits and vegetables are healthy. But what if you know that your clients live in a food desert? All they have is convenience stores or very small groceries. What are you going to tell them to eat that's healthier than the fast food stuff that they can get in vending machines? Well, canned or frozen vegetables are good if you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's that kind of thing. So you're actually really engaging yourself in the reading. You're thinking about what they're saying, and you might even disagree with what the author says. And that's fine too, because they're just people like you are. And if you disagree, then just tell your professor, this book said this, but what about this? And it's likely that your professor will say, oh yeah, that is a very valid perspective that the textbook author probably never even thought about. And so those are good things to do. Okay, and so now what I want to do is do a little activity that shows you how this works. So I'm going to put a passage on the screen. I'm going to give you a minute to read it, and then I'll ask you a question about it. So let's read this. Okay, you may not have read the whole thing, but I think you've read enough. Let me just ask, if I asked you to come to the front of the room and summarize that information to the group, would you be able to do that? No. Okay, not at all. I know I was not able to. But what if you had known before you started to read that that passage was about flying a kite? And so now I want you to reread it and just shake your head up and down yes or back and forth no. Does it make more sense to you now that you know what it's about? Okay, I'm seeing some people now, because now we know, even young children can enjoy it, birds seldom get too close. Now we have the context that all these things are in, because we gave our brain the big picture, because it knows now it's about flying a kite. And this will have exactly the same impact when you're doing your reading. If you take just a couple of minutes to get that overview, that preview, when you read, you'll be much more efficient, because now your brain has the context within which to put the information. And that's the reference for that and the web link if you wanted to go on and see that. Okay, and so now what I want to do is ask you a couple of reflection questions. And let me just say, I know that this is supposed to go until about 12:15. Okay, was everybody aware of that? Yes, okay, great. So the question is, what's the difference between studying and learning? So take about 10 seconds to see what you think the difference is. And I'm going to ask three people. Anybody raise your hand who wants to contribute. I'll pick three people. Okay, I see my number one, I see my number two, and I see my number three. Okay, yes, number one, what would you say?
So I think studying is like memorizing and learning is understanding.
She said studying is memorizing, learning is actually understanding. Number one answer that I get. Yes. Okay, number two.
One's studying is like passing by, learning is full immersion.
Okay, studying is like passing by and studying is full immersion. I haven't heard it stated exactly like that, but you're absolutely right. Let me take the number three, because she may say what I was going to say, the form that your answer usually comes in. Where's my number three? Yes.
Studying is more so like reviewing, and learning is like actually observing information.
Oh, okay. Studying is more like reviewing, but learning is actually absorbing the information. Fantastic. Okay. And I'm going to use both of those two. Sometimes people say studying is short-term, learning is long-term. And so if you're just passing through, then you're not going to remember that long-term. But if you immerse yourself in it, then you will. And if you are really immersing yourself, say what you said one more time. Yeah.
Studying is reviewing, and learning is more so like absorbing.
Yeah. And so if you're just reviewing stuff, then you are not likely to absorb it. If you don't absorb it, then that's not going to be long-term either. So there's definitely a difference. So if we say the difference basically is, memorizing, kind of passing through, versus making sure you totally understand it, up to this point in time, and you can yell this answer out, would you say you've been more often in study mode or in learn mode? Study. Now you are like I was, and like the audiences that I talked to, absolutely. And, okay, study mode. And then the next question is, if I gave you two scenarios, I want to know if you work harder for one of these than the other. If I came to you and I said, the next test in this class is next week, and you didn't do well at all in the first test, so you have to make an A on this test coming up, you know how hard you would work for that. Versus if I came to you as the professor and said, look, the next test in this class is next week, and I decided that I'm going to have to give the class what everybody wanted me to do before the first test, and I didn't do it. Everybody kept saying, can we have a review session? Are you going to give us a review session? I said, no, this is Delgado. We don't do review sessions here. That was so high school, so I didn't offer a review session, but the class did horribly. The average was 50. So I said, I got to give a review session before this next test is coming up. So I'm going to offer a review session, and you are going to teach that review session. I'm going to have you come up to the front of the class, and you are going to explain all of the information, paying particular attention to the more difficult concepts to make sure everybody is prepared for the test that's coming up. Would you work harder for A or B?
B.
Okay, and some of you may be thinking A, and what I find is that the students who say A typically are studying the right way, but most of us say B. Now, why would you work harder for B? Yes?
Well, because if you understand it, you can teach it to others. If you can teach yourself, you can teach others in the class to be successful as you.
Exactly. He said if you really understand it, then you can teach it. And sometimes people say, well, if I have to teach it, I know I have to really understand it. Absolutely. Anybody else have an idea? Yes?
You can also learn a lot more from your peers.
You can learn a lot more from your peers, he's saying, because you're hearing how they express the information. Absolutely. Okay, one more. I saw another hand, I think. Yes?
And you don't want to look like you don't know information in front of
Yeah, she said you don't want to you don't want to look stupid in front of your classmates. That's the number 2 I get. Yeah, they'll say I really need to understand it. I don't want to look stupid in front of my class. And then I saw you had a response. What were you going to say? Oh, the same. Okay. The third one I get is they'll say, well, I want to make sure that I teach it very well. And so I'm trying to make sure I can explain it more than one way. I can use pictures, I can use charts, because everybody has to understand. And so they recognize that they, like you, would work harder if they had to teach the material. So up to this point in time, would you say you have been more in, so hold up your fingers, in mode 1 or mode 2? Okay, yeah, everybody's 1. And I love it, actually. I love it when you're doing everything wrong, because when you're doing everything wrong, that suggests that when you change things, you are much more likely to see a really big impact. And so basically what I would like for you to do is make sure that you stay in learn mode and you prepare as if you have to teach the material. Now, I'll give you an example. This was a student who heard about this, this process of pretending to teach. And so he heard about it September 17th, October 25th. He sent me an email telling me that his final exam grades had gone from 66 to 98. And his chem exam had gone from 62 to 83. And I got the rest of his bio scores, but not chem. But he ended up with a B in both courses, and he was on the way to failing before that. And he sent me an email to tell me what he did differently. He started going to a lot more of the SI. Do you have SI here, supplemental instruction? Yeah. Okay, so they're like peer-led group review sessions. So I'm going to use tutoring here, because you have tutoring, right? Okay, so he started going to more of those tutoring sessions. But before he heard this information, he didn't do anything to prepare for the sessions. He would just go and ask questions. But after he heard this, he started making sure he prepared so he could see exactly what he understood. And then when he got to the session, he knew exactly what to ask, what he needed to pay attention to. And then when he got back to his room, he would teach the stuff to his beta fish. And anything he couldn't understand, he would explain more. And he continued that process until he could explain everything in his notes. And so, and that's what you heard Dana said she did. She was doing homework as if she had to teach it. And so I really encourage you to do that. We had a vet school student who was failing animal physiology, and she ended up making an A in the course, and I asked her what she did. She said, Dr. McGuire, I have the smartest dog in animal physiology on the planet. Because every day she would go home and she would teach him the information. And so, yeah, this was from a nursing student who was not doing well, and he did very well after the first test. After the first test, after learning these, because he made like a 95, and he had gotten overly excited by the time he got to question 5 out of 50 question test, because he said, I knew so much content for almost every right and wrong answer. I was shocked by how much knowledge I possessed. and he had not been doing well before. So yeah, and these were his HESI scores. But when I talk to the nursing students, I'll say a little bit more about that. So basically we got a, oh, I thought I changed it. Okay, I talked to Ivy Tech a couple weeks ago, and I changed the rest of the presentation, but not that. But when you get it, it'll say Delgado. Okay, go back. Stay in learn mode and prepare as if you have to teach the material. Now, I'm confident that you can make faster and dramatic increases. I tell students all the time, I don't care if you made a 40 on the first test. I know you can make 80, 90 higher on the next test, because your 40 had nothing to do with how smart you are. It had everything to do with the strategies you used. And so here's a little exercise that's going to demonstrate that for you. On the next slide after this one, there are going to be a whole bunch of numbers all jumbled out. And I'm going to give you 15 seconds to first find the number 1, then find the number 2, find them in sequential order, and in 15 seconds I'm going to take it off the screen. So start finding the numbers now. Okay, so raise your fingers and tell me what's the last number you saw finding in sequential order. Okay, I'm seeing 4s, I see a 9, I see 6. Okay, so most of us are single digits, or probably some had low double digits. So we didn't get very far, but I'm just going to look at it again with this vertical line, this horizontal line, and the position of the number 1. And so now I'm going to ask you, what do you see about how the other numbers are arranged? What are they arranged according to? If you go from the 1 to the 2 to the 3. Yes, I'm seeing people doing this. Yeah, they're clockwise or through quadrants. And so now that we know this, because the 1 is in this quadrant, then 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And so now that we know that that's the organization, I'm going to give you another 15 seconds, and we'll see how far we get this time. So let's start finding the numbers now. And stop. Did you get a lot farther this time? Did most of us get at least twice as many? Okay, yeah, so that shows you made a 45 on the first test, 90 on the next test. But the reason that we did so much better, there were some major differences. What was one of the differences? We knew how the information was organized, absolutely. And so when we knew how it was organized, we could look at a smaller area of the screen. And so that suggests that instead of waiting and have everything pile up, you got to study a bunch. If you study a little bit at a time, your brain is going to be a lot more efficient. We could look at a smaller area, and we were seeing it for the second time. And so when you review your coursework, you'll see it for a second time, and that makes a big difference. Okay, and so basically we're saying that to turn yourself into an efficient expert learner, you got to do these things. And Bloom's taxonomy is one of the things I want to go over now. Okay, I'm noticing I'm having so much fun with you guys. It is 12:12, and so I may go over like about 6 minutes, but I never do that without getting permission from my audience. So is it okay if I go over about 6 minutes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. And they're recording it, so, oh wow, I've been blocking the screen the whole time. And so if you have to leave, not a problem, because they're recording it. But thank you for permission to do that, because I wanted to talk to you about Bloom's taxonomy, which is this hierarchy of learning levels that we talked about, where you see remembering is the base. And sometimes, because remembering seems to be at the bottom, it goes from remembering to understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, up to creating, where you go from just memorizing information to being able to say it in your own words, to being able to apply it to things you've never seen before, to now being able to take any concept and break it into smaller concepts and explain how they all fit together, to looking at any two thoughts, ideas, theories, and determining whether one is more likely to be correct than another, to creating your own information, then that's Bloom's taxonomy. And sometimes students think that because remembering is at the base, that means you don't have to memorize anything, but nothing could be further from the truth. Because remembering is the base of the triangle for a specific reason. Because you gotta have stuff in your head to be able to understand and apply. And so given this, I want you to think back to high school and raise your fingers and let me know, in high school, what do you think the highest level you usually had to be at to make A's and B's in your high school classes? Raise your fingers for me and tell Okay, so I'm seeing some ones and twos. I see a couple of threes, yeah, but more ones and twos. Now, when you look at what's happening here, what do you think you will have to operate to make the A's that you're totally capable of making here at Delgado? Okay, so I'm seeing some twos and threes. Now, this is very interesting. Okay, because let me ask this. How many of you have any, there you go. How many of you have any term papers or projects that you have to do in any of your classes? Raise your hand if that's the case. Okay. Well, and so maybe in the classes you are now, it may be that a lot of you, if you're at understanding it'll work, but you will get to classes where you're going to have to do projects or term papers, and if that's the case, what level is that, do you think? 6, exactly. So, and you're going to have to be at 6 at some point. And so that means that we've got to raise our levels. And that's really the third piece of the puzzle. So if we start focusing on learning instead of studying, prepare to teach the information, and move higher on Bloom's taxonomy, then you're going to just hum right along. And how do you move yourself higher? Well, we recommend something that we call the study cycle. It's just a 5-step process where before you go to class, you preview the information that's going to be covered in class. Use your syllabus to see what's going to be discussed. Spend about 5-10 minutes to kind of get your mind prepared for what's going to happen in class. And then the next thing is go to class. And I know that if you're here, and this is optional, all of you go to class. But you got to be in class both physically and mentally. I was always there physically, but I really wasn't paying attention. I was just trying to get everything down in the notes to go over later. But if you've done your previewing, then you can be actively engaged in the lecture. And then the next one is, as soon after class as possible, review what just happened in class. And that starts information moving from short-term to long-term memory. And you've got to do more than just the preview and review. So we talk about focused study sessions, so it shows you how to structure your study sessions. If you set aside about 45 minutes or so, take a minute or two to come up with a specific goal. And then for 30, 40, 50 minutes, then study with focus and action, then take a break, come back and review, and then do another one if you can. Now sometimes students say, well, I have ADHD, I can't study for an hour. You can do this in 10 minutes. Set a goal for a minute, study for 8 minutes, review. You don't need to take a break if it's 8 minutes or a 10-minute session, but you can still make this work. So I highly recommend that. This was a student who used it, and she got an A+ on 3 out of 4 of her finals using that method of studying. She said it benefits students all the way through the semester, but it's really beneficial for finals because it's a time management tool also. Okay, and in the last few minutes, I want to just introduce you to the concept of mindset that has to do with the attitude that most people have about intelligence. This is the work of a cognitive scientist at Stanford, Carol Dweck, and what she found was that most people have one of two views about intelligence. They think that either you are born with a certain amount of it that's not going to change very much over your lifetime. She calls that a fixed mindset. Or the other mindset is that you can grow your intelligence. I'm getting a little warm, so I'll take my coat off. But you notice I'm representing Delgado. And yeah, so she said, Professor Sherman said it was yellow. And yeah, it's a shade of yellow, but your colors are green and gold, right? Yes, it's really, I think of it as gold. But you can grow your intelligence with your actions, and she calls that a growth mindset. And so let me ask you, well, I'll tell you the difference. If you have a fixed mindset, then you tend to avoid challenges. You give up very easily when you get to an obstacle. You see effort as pointless because you think either you're smart enough to do it without putting in any effort, or you're not smart enough to do it at all. And you ignore useful feedback if it's critical, and you feel threatened when others are successful. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you embrace challenges, you persist even when there are setbacks. You know that effort is the path to mastery, and you learn from criticism, and you're not threatened when others are successful. You're inspired by that. And so let me just ask you to think about most students, and do you think most students have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset about intelligence? Fixed, yeah, because we're actually socialized to think that either you were born smart or we're not smart, but that is, nothing could be further from the truth. And so I want you to know that everybody in here, we can all make ourselves smarter.
And this is an email that I got from a student who was at Princeton University, and she was getting B's and C's and thought that she couldn't do any better. But then when she read the growth mindset chapter in the book, she realized that if she used the strategies, then she could do a lot better. And so she went from making B's and C's her freshman year to getting all A's and an A+ on her senior thesis just by using the strategies. And she said she now knows that just because you're from a public high school, no matter what your background is, that doesn't mean you cannot excel, because you can thrive here using the strategies that we talked about. Okay, and so in about 2 minutes, I'm going to end. But these are just a recap of the effective strategies. And I want to go for paying particular attention to aim for 100% mastery. Because you study a little bit differently if you're going for 100% versus 90%. Yeah, I know. I would skip stuff if I was just going for 90 and told myself, it's probably not going to be on the test. But was it on the test? Yes, it's always on the test. And so you won't be able to do this now, but before you go to sleep tonight, I want you, of all the strategies we talked about, you don't have to use them all, but choose 1 or 2 or 3 that you'll start implementing, and implementing them immediately. And those of you who are maybe doing some undergraduate research, then think about how you could use this in your undergraduate research activities. And so I'm going to just look at these and raise your fingers and tell me which one of those do you think you are more likely to implement based on what we talked about. The study cycle, okay, doing your homework differently, using the textbook more problems. Okay, yes. And so just pick 1 or 2 and you'll be good. And so in the lab, because if you don't start it within the next 48 hours, you probably never will. And so I want to end by telling you why the bumblebee can fly. Well, as I said, these calculations were being done in the 1930s when aerospace science was in its infancy. And so the calculations that this guy was doing, he had the wrong assumptions. He was assuming that bumblebee wings were like airplane wings, and they're not. Bumblebee wings are, and here's the bumblebee again, they are not like airplane wings at all. Airplane wings are smooth and flat, and they don't move. But bumblebee wings look like this. They have lots of bumps and zigs and zags, and they are constantly flapping. And it's this constant flapping that creates these airfoils that gives the bumblebee enough lift to stay aloft. So the moral of this story is, if anybody tells you you're not going to be able to be successful at what you're trying to tell them, check your assumptions. I am a Delgado Community College Dolphin, and I can do anything I set my mind to, and then drop my walk away and leave them in your green and gold dust. And I will